What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the course. So today is May 18th. So it is week 7 of our homeschool program. There's just one more week left, believe it or not. So we only have about 5 or 6 more classes to go, and it's been a real pleasure sharing this time with you. I hope you guys have found it helpful. I'm really excited about today's lecture, which we're going to talk about is answering questions with a TOEFL teacher. So we're going to bring everything together that I teach about the reading, all these strategies, and we're going to go through one reading passage and all 10 questions from that passage together. And so this part of our homeschool program, the world is crazy, it's out of your control. What is in your control is your mind and how you spend your time. So let's put it to some good use and let's talk about the TOEFL. Yay! Exciting. So just let's get into it. So my name is Josh McPherson. I'm the head instructor at TST Prep. It's our mission to help you get your TOEFL scores quickly and easily as possible. I studied ESL education, 10 years of experience. I teach TOEFL, and I write articles and make videos about TOEFL, as you can see, and here I am. So our goals today is that you're going to avoid trying to make the same mistakes as other TOEFL test takers on test day. And you want to eliminate choices and identify correct answers through recognition of typical TOEFL patterns. So this is actually similar to our goals from another lecture, but basically we just want to avoid the same mistakes and we want to eliminate to get to the correct answer. So it's very similar. We're basically kind of reviewing what we've learned, trying to apply it so you can do your best on test day. And this is the TOEFL emergency course. We want to help you get your score as quickly and easily as possible. We don't want you to become a TOEFL scholar or a TOEFL warrior or a TOEFL whatever. We want you to get your score and move on with your life. So check out our TOEFL emergency course at tstprep.com. And people say nice things about us. This is Jokopo, and I hope I pronounced his name right. He said, my TOEFL experience was pretty fast but rewarding. My English level was already above the average, but I only had 5 days to prepare, and I needed help, especially for the speaking. Got 109 with 26 in speaking. Everybody's different. Your level might not be at his level, but he found that course very helpful and kind of perfect for what he was looking for. Okay, so the way this is going to work is that we're going to look at a passage and then start answering questions about it. The thing that you have to keep in mind is that looks small. I'm going to show you how it looks close up. So I'm going to zoom in on this in a minute. So if it looks small, that's okay. We're going to zoom in and talk about it more. If you would like to do this first, you want to practice this reading first before you hear me explain my answers and explain everything. You can check it out here. You could pause the video and read it first, or you could just start answering together with me. Totally up to you which way you want to do it. So let's take a look at this together. And we're going to look at this passage on speciation. And this is about how to skim. If you see that there's certain parts highlighted in yellow, and they're highlighted in yellow, it's the first sentence of each paragraph, the title, and the last sentence of the first paragraph, because this gives you an idea of what the passage is about. So you want to skim so you can have some idea of what this is about before you start answering the questions. All right, so that's one strategy there. And when I do that, this is the information I get from our test number 11 about speciation. So I'm going to read some of this out loud so you can get a feeling for how this, what this is about, really. This is going to help you answer the questions because you'll be able to know what information is important and what's not so important. So it's about speciation. The biological definition of a species is that it's an organism and a group is potentially interbreeding individuals. Okay. In fact, the presence of hybrids between similar species says that they may have descended. Okay, so they're descended from a single species. There must be mechanisms from 2 original species, geographically continuous population. So I'm reading this kind of fast, and I don't expect you to understand exactly what's going on. Again, you want to skim so you get an idea of what's happening. So I'm reading this to just kind of get an idea that, okay, this is about speciation, and speciation has something to do with the way that species are made. And then it's going to talk about how geography can influence a species and how they form. Right? So that's the idea I have. If that is too difficult If you read that and you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about, that's okay. And that strategy of skimming will not be so helpful if you have no idea what you're reading. But you should get some idea of what you're reading and what it's about. And again, if I'm going too fast at any time, you can always pause this video and read more carefully. So the 4-step formula, this is the 4 steps that I recommend students take to answer any TOEFL reading question. There's some variation depending on the question type and that I go into more detail in our complete course. But here I'll just make it pretty simple, is that you should understand the question. Is it a vocabulary question, a factual information question? Find 7 or fewer keywords. We'll talk about keywords a little bit more. You scan the paragraph for information and you eliminate at least one choice. You want to try to eliminate at least one choice because the TOEFL is tricky and they will give you answers that look correct but actually aren't. So you want to be able to check to make sure that your answer is correct by looking at other choices. All right, so let's look at this here, and I'm going to just read out loud and I'm going to explain what I'm thinking out loud, and I'll move my mouse so you can see where I am. Oh, sorry about that. So according to paragraph 1, which of the following is true? Okay, so I'm looking for keywords first. So I understand that this is a factual information question. And I'm going to find some keywords. The definition of species only works for organisms that interbreed. So definition of species only works. It must be possible for 2 individuals to have fertile offspring. So then fertile offspring. Okay, so I'm looking for definition of species and something about fertile offspring here. Okay, oh, and there it is, first sentence. The biological definition of species, which works for sexual, is a group of actually or potentially interbreeding individuals. One species is distinguished from another by the possibility of mating. So one species is distinguished from another by the possibility of matings between individuals from each species to produce fertile offspring. There's fertile offspring. So I go back here. Only works for organisms that interbreed. It says a group of actually or potentially interbreeding. So this word potentially means they could interbreed. So I don't think A is correct because this says only works and this says potentially. In order to be, it must be possible for 2 individuals to have fertile offspring. So I saw fertile offspring here, and one species distinguished from another by the possibility of matings between individuals. So there's a possibility of mating from each species to produce fertile offspring. This doesn't talk about what's considered a species, though. It says according to this definition, one species. So this could be correct. B is okay. Let me keep reading and see if these other 2 are all right. So I eliminated A so far. When 2 very similar produce offspring, it's called a hybrid. That hybrid offsprings are possible. When 2 very similar produce offspring, it is called a hybrid. So I mean, that sounds pretty good. Many species are similar enough that hybrid offspring are possible and may occur in nature. Let's see here. Okay, so hybrids between similar species that they may have descended from a single interbreeding species. This is never mentioned D. So I have it down to 2 choices here, B or C. And I'm almost positive it's C because this is pretty much exactly what's said in the passage here. So B, this is what throws me off. In order to be considered a species, it must be possible to have 2 individuals to have fertile offspring. It says that one species is distinguished from another by the possibility of matings, but this doesn't talk about what it means to be a species. That's slightly different. So C is going to be the best answer here. If you pick B, I understand this one's kind of tricky, but C is the correct answer. The passage talks about distinguish between the 2, and this one talks about what it means to be a species. It's slightly different. So C is going to be the best answer here. A lot of times in the TOEFL, you'll have 2 choices that look pretty good, and you'll have to decide which one is best. So one thing is this for this 8 simple rules. I go into this in another lecture. Basically what I'm doing in these lectures is I'm bringing a lot of strategy in our complete course at TST Prep into this one lecture. So if some of these are kind of confusing, I understand. But this is about how to tell what type of question you're dealing with. And that was a factual information question. it includes all the other wording. So all of these different question types, there's 10 question types in total. They have some things that will help you uh, figure out if it's this type of question or not. So for example, with number 3, insert text have black squares. When you see those black squares, you know it's insert text. So, if you need a lot of help with this, you could study this chart here. We'll try to make a video in the future about this, but that's just an idea for you about how to tell what type of question it is. Okay, so now we have a vocabulary question. Now, if you go back really quickly, I can see that vocabulary choices contain few words, right? So if I look here, it's just a phrase descended from, and I have these 4 choices. Okay. So it says, in fact, the presence of hybrids between similar species suggests they have descended from a single interbreeding species. Okay, so I identify the question, my 4 steps. I don't have to look for keywords too much for vocabulary questions because there's not too many words. And then I am going to basically look at the paragraph where it is. I don't really have to scan the paragraph. I could just look at the sentence. It's highlighted. And I'm going to read the sentence and try to figure out what it means. Now, if you know what descended from means, you still want to read the passage because it's going to help you see the word in context. A lot of times they will give you a word that's easy, that you probably know, but it's used in a different way in the reading. So you want to be careful with that. So you definitely want to read the sentence, which I just did. So this is about speciation, and I know this is about, making new species. The presence of hybrids suggests that they may have descended from a single interbreeding species. So descended from, let's see here, we have come from, gone from, relished in, provided for. So the presence of hybrids, now I read this before in the last sentence, the last question, and hybrids were when two similar species mate and they make a new offspring. So come from sounds pretty good because that's pretty similar to when a man and a woman love each other very much and they have a baby. The baby comes from those people, comes from those parents. Gone down is, so descend, if you know what descend means actually to go down. And so if you know what descend means and you don't read this passage, you might think B is a good option. But this phrase descended from actually means like come from. It means that you are from, there's an expression, your descendants. A descendant is a person who's from a father, grandfather, grandmother, great-grandmother, and so on. So those are your descendants. So A is the best answer here, come from. Now I could get that even though I could get this from the context. I can see that this is about speciation. It's about, defining what makes a species. It's about making hybrids. So I can make a pretty good guess based on the situation, based on the context of what this word means. All right, let's go to the next one. So, before I go to the next one, let me give you a little bit of a warning. Do not pick an answer because it sounds right. Your mind is powerful. You have the power to make anything sound right. So let me go back to this vocabulary question really quickly. I hear a lot of TOEFL teachers give this advice, that when you are trying to answer the question, let's say you think the answer is provided for, okay? What you should do is that you should put provided for right here and then say it out loud and then say, does this sound right? So in fact, the presence of hybrids between similar species suggests that they may have provided for a single interbreeding species. Hey, that sounds pretty good. Why can't D be the answer? I think that, so some teachers, give this advice that you should say it out loud, does it sound right? But you can make anything sound right. And what sounds right to you might not sound right to me. So it's very subjective. I don't think it's very good advice. You can use that strategy. It should be one of the last things you do on test day. Is if you're answering vocabulary questions and you want to check to see if you're correct, you can use this strategy, but just be aware that I don't think it works very well. I think you can make anything sound right. So just be careful if you're going to use that type of strategy. All right, so just wanted to say that. Let's go to the next one. Now here's a tricky question type here. All of the following are true except. This is a negative detail question, or according to ETS, negative factual information question. So for this question, what you have to do is you have to find the wrong answer. Now this is really tricky. This is one of the 3 reasons why students get questions wrong. And let me just go to that really quickly. You get a question wrong because either you misread the question, you misread the passage, or you don't understand the vocabulary. This is the first one here, you misread the question. So if you're trying to answer this question and you're trying to find the correct answer, which is very natural, you find the correct answer for every other question type except this one. You're going to get it wrong because you're going to choose the correct answer. You have to find the incorrect choice. So that's really tricky. You look for words like except or not to spot a negative factual information question. Be very careful with this. Okay, so I identify the question. Let me look at some keywords here. Speciation, 2 different species from one, okay. An illustration of Darwin's. So I look at A and B for some keywords. So I see speciation, 2 different species. And I remember that from A, well, I'll get to that in a second. So B, there's only 1 illustration, Darwin's only. So I'm looking for 1 illustration and speciation definition. Okay, here we go. And let me use my mouse so you can see what I'm looking at. Given the extraordinary diversity of life on the planet, there must be mechanisms for speciation, information. So I'm going to just scan this paragraph first. And so I see speciation here, so that looks good. But I'm just going to scan this really quickly. And I see only illustration on origin of species. So I see these 2, and I'm like, okay, those are not the correct answer because they're correct. But I'm going to just scan the rest of this paragraph here. Allopatric. So I see allopatric speciation and meaning speciation in other homelands, sympatric speciation meaning speciation in the same homeland. Okay, so I got an idea of this. It's defining speciation and different types of speciation, and the creation of 2 different species from one, the formation of 2 species from one original. So this is pretty much the same thing as choice A, so I'm going to eliminate that. You want to be careful with this. Usually they rewrite the sentence a little bit more. This is pretty similar to what's said here. But A is incorrect. B, there's only 1 illustration. I'm pretty sure I saw that. The only illustration found in the origin of species, so B, incorrect. So I'm left with options C and D. It is only considered speciation if 2 new species cannot interbreed, and there are a few vague categories that describe how speciation could happen. So I really don't like this phrase, few vague categories. This word vague really throws me off because vague is not specific. It's kind of like it's not specific in a negative way. And it's only considered speciation if 2 new species cannot interbreed. I don't like this word only and not. So only is too strong of a word. It's usually signals that something is incorrect. So between C and D, and I don't like either of these choices. So I see here speciation, the formation of 2 species from 1 original species. So C doesn't look right to me, but let me keep reading. And then if I do, I see, so sorry about that. And so if you see here, it says, for speciation to occur, 2 new populations must be formed from 1 original population. So there it is, actually. For speciation to occur, 2 new populations must be formed from 1 original population, and they must evolve in such a way that it becomes impossible for individuals from the 2 new populations to interbreed. So that's what C says here. It's only considered speciation if 2 new species cannot interbreed. It becomes impossible for individuals from the 2 new populations to interbreed. So this is correct. From the 2 new species, let me just make sure here. 2 new populations must be formed. They must evolve so that it becomes impossible for the 2 new populations to interbreed. Yeah, okay, so there's the 2 new populations, and there it is. So C is not correct. And then D, there are a few vague categories that describe how speciation function. And I see here, biologists have proposed mechanisms by which this could occur that fall into 2 broad categories. So I have 2 broad categories, and I have a few vague categories. This doesn't seem like a synonym to me, a few vague categories. A few is a little bit different from 2. I guess it could be 2, but really, I don't like this word vague. Vague means it's not specific, but see, broad categories, and they're specific: allopatric speciation and symbiotic speciation. So few and two is okay, but I see this word vague, and it just doesn't work. It's not vague. It's not uh, vague is like when it's not explained very clearly. These are explained pretty clearly, so I'm going to say D is the correct answer. This one, again, is tricky. C looks pretty good to me, too, but then it says it in the passage here, so D is the best answer. Really tricky, this one. You got to be careful. And so, again, make sure you read the question. Make sure you understand which question type you're answering, because if you try to find the correct answer, you're going to answer it wrong for this one. And so with keywords, 3 rules that you should think about here. So I talk about keywords a little bit. I'm not sure if you kind of know what I mean by keywords, but basically those are the verbs and nouns that are most important, that have the most information. And I'll show you some more examples as we go. Just so you keep in mind, keywords are not function words. Function words are like a and the, articles, or prepositions like in or by. Rule number 2, keywords are usually content words. Those are words like nouns and verbs. And keywords do not include typical TOEFL question wording, so you can ignore that question wording so you can focus on the most important information. The reason we use keywords is because they help you find information faster. Typical TOEFL question wording and function words don't really help you find information faster. And if you look here, words like speciation, 2 different species, I don't look at involves, I don't look at the, I don't look at of, I don't really look at to. I could look at to, but I don't look at of, I don't look at from. Of course, these words have important information, but what I'm trying to find is on the origin of species. I'm trying to find that information. Illustration, I'm trying to find that. There it is somewhere, right? I don't really focus too much on is or there or in. Again, keywords. You want to focus on them to help you find the answers faster. Now here's another question that is an inference question, so you have to read the question carefully. If you don't read the question carefully, you're going to answer this wrong. So this is an inference question, which means you have to make a guess about the answer. A good guess, an educated guess, but it might not be directly stated. So I'll say that again, it might not be directly stated in this paragraph. So since it's not directly stated, you have to be careful about how you answer this, because you want to find the inference, not the fact, not a factual information question. You want to find the inference. Let's try to find this inference together. What can be inferred from the paragraph? So okay, so I'm going to look for some keywords here. I'm not going to need to scan too much because I actually already scanned this paragraph, right? Let's see, there are likely more than 2 categories. Could be classified. So remember that the categories was mentioned here are not fully understood by biologists. Okay, biologists fall into 2 broad categories. Involves a geographic separation. Symbiotic meaning speciation of the same homeland of all species occurring with the parent species. So I don't see anything that says it's likely that there are more than 2 categories. It says biologists have proposed mechanisms, which means that they're, not 100% certain that this is the only categories. So when you're trying to figure out what happened in the past, you have to make a guess, an educated guess. So they've proposed mechanisms, they've given ideas about how speciation could occur. So, but it doesn't say that there's more than 2 categories. So it's not a bad answer because they're not sure, but it doesn't say that there's more than 2 categories. So I'm going to eliminate that one. The concept of speciation are not fully understood. So this sounds pretty good, that they're not fully understood, because they've proposed mechanisms, so they have some ideas about what might have happened. If you propose ideas, that's very different than state facts. When you state facts, it's like, this is what's true, this is what's true, this is what's true. When you propose something, you're like, I think this is what's true. That's very different. So you have to know what the word propose means here. And it means to kind of give an idea. B sounds pretty good to me. Let me keep reading. So if you notice, I don't answer and move on. I try to look at the other choices and eliminate. Darwin did not believe that diagrams added any value to his work. So I remember this about illustration here. There's only one illustration. Okay, so, there's only one illustration, and he did not believe that diagrams added any value to his work. That's actually not a bad answer, because if he only has one illustration, then clearly, maybe he didn't think it was that important. It's a little strong. That's the one thing that's kind of throwing me off. It doesn't add any value to your work. So he did have one diagram. So obviously that one diagram helped. So any value to his work? I don't know. That sounds a little too strong, a little too extreme. Like 0%, right? It doesn't help at all. 0. Well, he did have one in there. He thinks it helps a little bit, maybe in some way. So I don't think that's the correct answer. And D, there are a few conditions that must be met in order for speciation to occur. So that's just a fact. D, there are a few conditions that must be met. You don't have to make an inference. They actually say that. They say how does speciation occur, and they define that. That's a fact. That's actually stated in the passage. So again, this is an inference question. It's what can you infer, not what's true. So here is that it's not fully understood. Yes, you can infer that because it's something that's proposed. It's an idea. It might not be 100%. There are a few conditions that must be met. That's actually stated directly. That's a fact. It's true. I don't have to infer anything there. That's a factual information. So that's why it's important to understand the question type. If I just answer a regular factual information, I might pick D for this one. You want to infer, you want to make a guess about what's there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We got one more to do. You might be feeling like, wow, this is hard, or a little bit stressed. This is a lot of information. That's okay. You could watch this again, review it. And as you can see, these are tricky, right? A lot of these are pretty tricky. So I prepped for this lesson before, and I got one of these questions wrong. And I was like, why? I don't understand. So definitely don't feel too frustrated about this. It does take time to go over, and I just want to make sure that just by you staying here right now and watching this, you're doing a great job. Just keep it up. Stay focused. Let's do number 5. And in next week's lesson, we'll do 6 to 10. Okay, so number 5. What does the author say about alleles? I don't know if I'm going to pronounce that right. Alleles. I've never seen this word before, okay, but I'm still going to answer the question in paragraph 3. So I need to look for alleles, of course, and gene flow is quite restricted. So one thing that I want to talk about here really quickly is quite restricted and even more freely. So quite restricted even more freely. These are modifiers. These are changing the meaning of the sentence here. Gene flow is quite restricted, which means it's really restricted. Why is this word quite here? You got to be careful with modifiers. Let's look at another example. They flow even more freely. Freely is an adverb describing flow. Even more freely. Why is that there? They could just say allies flow in geographically discontinuous populations. Why do they have to put even more freely? These are modifiers. So what is a modifier? For our purposes, for the TOEFL, we're just going to keep it simple. It's an adjective or adverb that describes a verb or a noun. Adjectives describe nouns. The big dog, big, is describing dog. Adverbs describe verbs like ran quickly. Quickly is an adverb. So why are modifiers important? Because they totally change the meaning of a sentence. So if I say here, it's one of the biggest buildings in the world, it's very different than saying it's the biggest building. If I say it's one of the biggest buildings, well, then there are other buildings that are bigger. That's the inference I can make. But if I say it's the biggest building, it's only one. By putting that phrase one of, I change the meaning of the sentence. Let me give you just one more example, and you could read these other ones on your own. He owned most of the land. Well, there's some land he doesn't own, right? If I said he owned the land, he owns all of it. Why did I put most? That changes things. So you want to pay attention to these modifiers. They really change the meaning of a sentence. You can use them for inference questions, which I did for this little chart here. but you can also use it for these factual information questions like this here. Okay, so I'm looking for gene flow, I'm looking for alleles, and I'm looking for flow and discontinuous populations, continuous populations. Okay, and then right here, geographically has a gene flow. The gene flow, gene flow. Okay, I'm going to scan this paragraph first. I see a lot of what I'm looking for in the beginning, but I still want to scan the paragraph. Here, I see free flow is prevented, so I'm going to go back to here because here's even more freely. That's for a period of time. Okay, I don't really know what alleles are still, but I understand that it's talking about the way that these things can move around and the type of population it's in. Okay, so let's see, gene flow is quite restricted within geographically continuous. So let's see, restricted. And there's geographically continuous population has a gene pool that is relatively homogeneous. Okay, they're about the same. Gene flow, the movement of alleles, so there's the movement there across the species, is relatively free. So here we have relatively free. That sounds like flow even more freely, but that's talking about continuous population. This is talking about discontinuous population. So this says gene flow is quite restricted. Well, that's not true. It says that is relatively free. So I'm going to eliminate A. And can move and mate with individuals in a new location. So the frequency, okay. When populations become geographically discontinuous, here's geographically discontinuous, that free flow is prevented. Okay, so the free flow is prevented. Alleles flow even more freely. Nope, it's prevented. Boop. B is not correct. I have C and D left. That have been separate for a long time, so to become more various. And the frequency of alleles from one end of a distribution to another. I need to look for frequency of alleles and distribution. Okay. Okay, so I see this difference here, so I'm going to read this. Thus, their allele frequencies at numerous genetic loci gradually become more and more different as new alleles independently arise. This says have been separated become more various. So allele frequencies that have been separated become more various. This says that allele frequencies become more and more different, which is another way to say various, as new alleles independently arise. Okay, so C looks pretty good. Let me try to just find D here. Excuse me. Let's see here. The frequency of alleles from one end of a distribution. Okay. Okay, so this says the opposite of C. It says the frequencies are similar for the most part, and this says the allele frequencies at numerous genetic loci become more and more different. So C is the best answer, and I can eliminate D because it says similar, but it says different. All right, so C is the best answer. And that's another factual information question. So thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's a little dry kind of going through all these examples, but I hope you can learn something by hearing hearing my thought process and hearing how I think about each question and how I answer them and why I eliminate certain choices. We go through some of this in the TOEFL emergency course. We also have a complete course that we're working on now that can help you with this type of thing. Next week, we'll do questions 6 through 10. We'll talk about summary questions, everybody's favorite question that you hate probably. But anyway, thank you guys for sticking around. I hope you found it helpful. TSDprep.com. We help you get your score as quickly and easily as possible, but I appreciate you. Thank you for staying, and I'll see you next time. All right, take care, guys.